The Arctic is a graveyard of lost things. Ships swallowed by ice, civilizations buried under centuries of snow, and flights that vanish without a trace. Flight AE17 was one such mystery, a passenger plane that disappeared on Christmas Eve in 1976, leaving behind no wreckage or distress signal, just an eerie absence. Until now, a satellite scan detected a metallic anomaly in the ice of Alaska. Researchers believed they had finally found the lost plane. But as the excavation began, something felt off. Strange patterns in the ice, where no human had ever stood, and then the eyes, watching from the frozen expanse. The truth hidden within that plane was more than just a survival story. It was something far stranger, something that blurred the lines between humanity and nature. Jason W. stood by the window of his office in Anchorage, watching the sluggish snowfall. At 58, he had spent over 3 decades studying Alaska's rugged wilderness, but nothing had prepared him for the satellite images now spread across his desk. The metallic anomaly, discovered by military satellites in January 2016, initially seemed like a routine investigation, but as he examined the scans more closely, a shiver ran down his spine. Sarah Kinn, his research assistant, appeared at the door, her usually calm demeanor showing signs of excitement. "The thermal imaging results are in. You need to see this," she said. "Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories like this." Together, they pored over the new data. The shape was unmistakable, the distinct outline of an airplane's tail fin, buried deep in the ice at a precise 40-degree angle. Jason's hands trembled slightly as he compared the measurements to known aircraft specifications. "It matches," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. "Flight AE17. Every researcher in Alaska knew the story. The passenger plane that vanished without a trace on Christmas Eve in 1976. 150 souls lost in the wilderness, one of aviation's most enduring mysteries." Jason reached for the phone. "Get Thompson from the National Science Foundation and contact Elena Martin from the Wildlife Service. We'll need their expertise." What began as a simple investigation of an anomaly quickly evolved into one of the largest missions in Alaska's history. The National Science Foundation expedited their funding request, and the U.S. Air Force offered logistical support. Yet even as everything fell into place, Jason couldn't shake the feeling that they were about to uncover something far more profound than a simple crash site. On a bitterly cold January morning, Dr. Elena Martinez arrived in Anchorage. At 62, she was one of the world's leading experts on Alaskan wildlife behavior, particularly predators. Her silver hair was tied back in a practical braid as she entered the meeting room, already filled with specialists. "The site is about 80 miles northeast of Anchorage," Jason explained, pointing to a topographic map. "Average temperatures of minus 42 degrees Celsius and wind speeds of up to 18 meters per second. This won't be easy." Elena studied the satellite images with particular interest. "The topology of the ice fields is unusual," she said, tracing a series of irregular lines with her finger. "These patterns don't follow typical glacier movement." "What do you think?" Jason asked. "I'm not sure yet," Elena replied thoughtfully. "But in my experience, there's always a reason when nature deviates from the expected." The team spent a week preparing for the mission. 88 tons of specialized equipment were gathered: thermal drilling units, ground-penetrating radar, mobile lab facilities, and enough supplies to sustain a 30-person team for 2 months. Among the crew was Tom Harrison, an experienced pilot with 25 years of search and rescue missions. "I remember the crash of AE-17, he said during one of the planning sessions. "I was just a kid, but my father was part of the search team. He never got over not finding them." In early February, the convoy set out, a procession of heavy-duty vehicles crawling through the frozen landscape. Elena rode with Jason in the lead vehicle, her eyes scanning the horizon. Something gnawed at her scientific instincts. Suddenly, she raised a hand. "Stop!" she called. Jason signaled the convoy to halt. "What is it?" Elena pointed to a seemingly random patch of snow. "Do you see how the surface texture changes? Animals don't cross this section." Further investigation revealed a treacherous ice cave. Without Elena's trained eye, one of their vehicles might have disappeared into it. Years of studying predator behavior, she said with a slight smile. They leave clues if you know how to read them. As they pressed on, none of the team members knew they were about to solve a decades-old mystery or that they were being watched by eyes that understood the wilderness better than they ever could. The base camp was set up within 18 hours. Reinforced tents and portable structures withstood the brutal Arctic conditions. The wreckage site was less than a kilometer away, the tip of the tail fin protruding from the ice like a silent reminder of what had once happened. As the team set out for their first inspection, they noticed an unexpected sight. A female lynx, accompanied by two nearly grown cubs, lingered at the edge of their field of vision. "Look at the size of their paws," Elena murmured, peering through her binoculars. "That's extraordinary." The animals kept their distance from the camp, but didn't flee. Even stranger was their behavior at the crash site. The mother stepped carefully in certain areas, pacing back and forth, her cubs following her precisely. "They're avoiding weak spots in the ice," Elena noted. "But this goes beyond instinct. It's almost as if they've been taught this knowledge." The actual recovery operation began with surgical precision. Thermal elements were used strategically to avoid disrupting the delicate balance of the ice structure. Every movement was carefully calculated, every tool meticulously chosen. But with each section they uncovered, the scene grew more bizarre. The cabin was eerily well preserved, a frozen moment in time. Magazines lay open on trays. A beverage cart stood in the aisle, its contents intact. Coffee cups on the seats had frozen into small blocks of ice. Yet it was the personal items that touched them the most. A child's doll with braided yarn hair, a wallet containing photos of a smiling family, a stack of letters never sent. Each item was a silent testament to interrupted lives. In the cockpit, they found the captain's logbook. The final entries described multiple engine failures and instrument malfunctions. But even more revealing was a small notebook hidden in a crew compartment. It belonged to a flight attendant and contained entries about life after the crash. December 1976. Dawn, if you can call it that. 22 survivors. The first night was the real killer. The cold took us faster than the crash. Captain Matthews is rationing supplies. Julie is trying to keep morale up. How do you comfort people who lost everything on Christmas? December 1976. Radio dead. No sign of rescue. Captain Matthews says we're at least 100 miles from the last known position. The storm was unlike anything he's ever seen. It must have scrambled our instruments. Outside, we hear animals. Not wolves, something else. December 1976. Only 19 left. The cold is unbearable. Julie noticed something today. Tracks in the snow around the plane, but they seem to keep other predators away. Captain Matthews thinks we crashed in the territory of big cats. Somehow, that's comforting. January 1977. Only 12 left. Supplies are gone. Julie didn't wake up this morning, but we found fresh prey near the wreck. Small game, as if it was left for us. Captain Matthews says it's impossible, but we've stopped believing it impossible. The final entries were undated, but one message repeated. I am alone now, but I am not alone. They are here. I see their eyes in the darkness. Not hostile, watching, waiting. I understand now why they stayed. They are the guardians of this place. They know what it means to survive. Elena stared at the words for a long time. She thought of the lynx and her cubs, patrolling the crash site with an almost reverent air. She didn't believe in coincidences. There was something more to this story than animal behavior. She spent hours examining the area around the wreck, her observations growing stranger by the minute. There were tracks that couldn't have been made by predators alone, things that defied logic. Jason approached her. You look like you've seen a ghost. Elena nodded slowly. Maybe I have. Jason frowned. What do you mean? These lynxes, they don't behave like normal animals. It's as if they have a memory, generational. They're guarding this place. But why? Jason followed her gaze to the wreck. The wind howled through the frozen landscape, darkness closing in. In the distance, two glowing eyes reflected the cold moonlight. Maybe we should ask ourselves, Jason said quietly, whether we're the explorers here or the intruders. The discovery of the flight attendant's notebook changed the entire perspective of the mission. The words of a final survivor, the mention of lynxes as guardians, the inexplicable behavior of the animals. It all formed a disturbing picture. But one question remained. What happened to the last survivors of Flight AE17? Jason, Elena, and Sarah spent hours analyzing the wreck. The personal items told stories of hopes and dreams extinguished in the icy void. But another discovery marked a new phase of the investigation. Tracks of human footsteps preserved in a deeper layer of ice, suggesting that some passengers had left the wreck. But where? Elena noted the coordinates where the tracks abruptly ended. Comparing them to historical satellite images, she noticed a small ice cave that had appeared in earlier photos but later disappeared. Had this been their refuge? And if so, why had no one ever found them? The team prepared for another expedition. They followed the old tracks to a spot where the ice was unusually smooth, as if something had moved across it repeatedly over the years. Beneath a thin layer of snow, they found a narrow crevice leading deep into the ice. "We have to go down," Jason said firmly. "If we want to truly understand what happened, the answer lies down there." Elena nodded and called the other researchers over. The team secured safety ropes, activated helmet lamps, and began their descent into the glacier's crevice. The light reflected off the smooth ice walls as they moved deeper. Soon they reached a chamber whose walls were marked by unnatural patterns, almost like symbols, as if someone had tried to carve a message into the ice. Sarah examined the wall closely. These marks looked like they were made with primitive tools, maybe by the survivors. Elena ran her hand over the markings, or by someone else. Her gaze shifted to a dark corner of the chamber, where an arrangement of stones and bone fragments lay, almost like a shrine. Suddenly, a soft sound echoed, a scraping in the darkness. Everyone held their breath as their lamps illuminated a narrow passage leading deeper into the ice. And then they saw them, two yellow eyes reflecting the light at the end of the passage. The lynx, the old mother, stood there, her cubs close behind. She watched the team silently, not with fear, but with an almost calm, knowing presence. "She's leading us," Elena whispered. The lynx turned and slipped silently into the darkness. Without a word, the team followed. With each step, they ventured deeper into the heart of the glacier. The air grew colder, their lamps casting flickering shadows on the walls. It was as if they weren't the first to walk this path. Suddenly, the lynx stopped. Before them stretched a vast ice hall where the light refracted in strange ways. In the center of the chamber lay a pile of decaying fabric and wood, remnants of a primitive shelter, almost entirely encased in ice, and within it, a human figure. Elena stepped closer, her stomach tightening. The figure wore the tattered uniform of a flight attendant, hands folded as if in preparation for something. Jason picked up one of the wooden figures scattered around, crudely carved but unmistakably small lynxes, depicted in a watchful stance. "He knew," Elena whispered. "He knew they were here, that they had always been here." The lynx sat at the edge of the chamber, watching them with her deep, ancient eyes. Perhaps, Elena thought, the guardians of this place hadn't just protected it. Perhaps they had preserved its story. The discovery of the frozen figure was the final key to a decades-long mystery. The last survivor of Flight AE17 had sought refuge in the depths of the ice, guarded by the lynxes. His final act, primitive carvings, silent testaments to an extraordinary bond between humans and animals. Elena, Jason, and Sarah stood silently around the site, their minds racing. This wasn't just a story of tragedy. It was also one of compassion and preservation. The lynxes had watched over this place for generations, their presence etched into the ice itself. But why? Jason examined the frozen carvings more closely. Alongside the small lynx figures was something else, a rough pattern that seemed abstract at first. Only when Elena shone a light over it did she recognize it. "These are constellations," she murmured, "but they're not random. They depict the exact night the plane disappeared." Sarah stepped closer, comparing the positions to her database. "He documented the last night he saw under an open sky," she said, her voice filled with awe. The lynx slowly moved to the site and sat down, as if standing guard. Her gaze rested on the researchers. calm yet demanding, as if ensuring they understood. Jason stepped back and looked at Elena. We have everything we need. This story must be told. The recovery of the last survivor was carried out with the utmost respect. His body was carefully extracted from the ice and prepared for a dignified return. His carvings were documented and preserved, a silent testament to the 40 years he had spent among the Guardians. As the last researchers left the site, the lynxes remained. The mother sat in her place, as if her watch was not yet over. Perhaps it never would be. Months later, a memorial was erected at the crash site. It honored not only the 150 souls of Flight AE17, but also the unexpected guardians who had watched over them for nearly half a century. The world learned of the lynxes and their astonishing behavior. Biologists and researchers from around the globe came to understand what had happened here. Yet some secrets could not be explained by theories alone. Elena returned to the crash site year after year. She observed the new generation of lynxes following in the footsteps of their ancestors. She knew they carried a legacy, one that went far beyond instinct. On a cold evening, as the aurora borealis lit up the sky, Elena sat at the edge of the camp, watching the mother lynx and her cubs glide through the snow. They followed the same paths as always, as if the past had never truly passed. There are things we may never fully understand, Jason said, sitting beside her. But this is something special. Elena nodded. It's a reminder that we're not alone, and that compassion knows no boundaries. She thought of all the research that followed, the articles she had written. Yet no scientific analysis could capture the profound truth of this encounter. 5 years later, Elena returned to the crash site once more. Not as a researcher, but as a witness to an ongoing story. The lynxes were still there. The mother was old now, her muzzle gray, but she continued to lead her cubs through the frozen land. Elena sat in her small research station, writing her final notes, and looked at the picture of a lynx hanging on the wall. There are legends written in ice and snow, she whispered, and they live on in those willing to listen. She closed her notebook and stepped out into the cold. An icy wind swept through the landscape, but she felt the warmth of the story she had been part of. Jason waited at the edge of the camp, ready to leave. Elena looked back at the horizon, where the lynxes disappeared into the distance. Yes, she said with a gentle smile, but a part of me will always remain here. The lynxes vanished into the darkness, but their story would live on forever. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories like this. Thanks to our valued viewers, we continue to improve every day. Please subscribe and give this video a thumbs up.